Silence in that hospital corridor was the kind that presses against your chest. I remember standing just outside the double doors, still in my scrubs, my stethoscope cold against the back of my neck. My stepmother was somewhere behind me, laughing at something my brother said. I hadn't turned around. I'd stopped turning around for a long time. It had started 3 weeks earlier with a phone call I almost didn't answer. My brother was getting married. Destination wedding, he said, except the destination was the Fairmont Chateau Frontenac in Quebec City, which told me everything I needed to know about who was actually paying for it. My stepmother had been planning this for 2 years. She'd sent me the invitation last after everyone else had already RSVP'd. The envelope had my name spelled wrong, not my last name, my first name, the name she'd been hearing for 27 years. I stared at it for a long time before I called my dad back. "She's trying," he said. That was his answer for everything. "She's trying. She means well. You know how she gets. A whole vocabulary of excuses, worn smooth from overuse. I'm a trauma surgeon. I did my residency at Sunnybrook in Toronto, then 2 years in Calgary, before I came back east to take a staff position at the Ottawa Hospital. I was 32. I had not slept more than 5 consecutive hours in probably 4 years. I had also not, in that same period of time, been invited to a single family dinner that my stepmother organised. Not Christmas, not Thanksgiving, not my brother's engagement party, which I heard about from a cousin who'd accidentally texted me instead of her. My dad would call. He always called. We'd talk for 20 minutes about nothing, the weather, hockey, a documentary he'd watched, and then I'd hang up and sit in my car in the hospital parking lot and feel something I didn't have a good word for. Not quite grief. Not quite anger. Something that had been living in my chest for so long it had started to feel like furniture. I went to the wedding. I told myself it was for my dad. That's what I always told myself. I drove up from Ottawa on the Thursday before the Saturday ceremony. My dad had texted me the hotel name, different from where the family was staying, I noticed, though I hadn't said anything about it. I checked in, changed, and drove to the rehearsal dinner at a restaurant in Old Quebec, one of those narrow stone-walled places where the tables are too close together and everything costs $30 more than it should. My stepmother was standing at the entrance when I arrived. She looked at me the way she always looked at me, that quick scan, top to bottom, like she was taking inventory of everything that didn't belong. "Oh," she said, "you made it." Not hello, not "I'm glad you're here," just, "Oh, you made it," like I was a package she'd been expecting to be lost in transit. My brother hugged me, which was genuine, I think. He's not a bad person. He just learned a long time ago that it was easier to let our stepmother set the temperature in every room, and he'd never unlearned it. His fiancée, Heather, squeezed my hand and whispered that she was really glad I'd come, and she sounded like she meant it. I sat at the far end of the table. Over dinner, my stepmother talked about the wedding the way people talk about films they've produced, with that particular pride of someone who believes their vision is being correctly executed. She mentioned the flowers 3 times. She described the ceremony choreography in detail. She talked about the guest list and who had said what complimentary thing about the venue. At some point, she looked down the table at me and said, loud enough that the people between us could hear, "We kept the seating simple, since we weren't sure until quite late who'd be able to make it." I set down my fork. Not dramatically, just set it down. "RSVP'd 6 weeks ago," I said. She smiled. "Of course you did, sweetheart." The table moved on. I picked my fork back up. I felt my dad looking at me from across the table, and I didn't look back. That night, in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and thought about all the versions of this moment I'd lived through. The graduation she'd not attended because of a trip she'd already booked. The birthday dinner where she'd spent the whole evening talking about my brother's new promotion. The Sunday years ago when I'd come home from my first year of university and she'd redecorated my childhood bedroom into a craft room while I was gone. I'd stood in the doorway with my duffel bag and my dad had said, quietly, from behind me, "She mentioned she was going to do that." I had not cried then. I did not cry now. I just thought I should not have come. The wedding day was beautiful in the way that Quebec City in October is always beautiful. Cold and golden, the kind of light that makes the old stone buildings look like they're lit from inside. I put on the dress I bought specifically for the occasion, dark green, which I'd thought was maybe too formal until I arrived and saw that half the guests were dressed like they were attending a state dinner. The ceremony was in the hotel chapel. I sat in the third row beside my aunt and her husband, who I hadn't seen in 2 years. She took my hand when I sat down and didn't let go, which I appreciated more than I could say. My stepmother processed in with my dad, and she looked, I have to admit, genuinely happy. Not performing happiness, actually feeling it. For a moment, I let myself think that maybe that was enough. Maybe watching your son get married is the kind of thing that opens people up, softens them, makes them capable of something they hadn't been before. Then she looked down the row and her eyes passed over me like I was part of the woodwork. The reception was in one of the grand ballrooms upstairs. Round tables with tall centerpieces, a string quartet for dinner, a DJ for after. I found my place card and it took me a moment to process what I was reading. My name, again slightly wrong, this time a transposition of the vowels in my middle name, which I'd had for 32 years, was placed at a table near the kitchen entrance. Not at the back of the room exactly, just close enough to the kitchen that I could hear the servers talking through the wall, and far enough from the head table that I would need binoculars to make eye contact with my brother. I stood there holding the place card and a waiter came out of the kitchen and nearly walked into me and said, "Sorry, ma'am, can I help you find your seat?" And I said, "I found it," and sat down. The table seated 8. I knew one other person, a colleague of my brother's from his old job, a nice man named Trevor who seemed equally bewildered by his placement. We talked about hockey. We talked about whether Quebec City would ever get an NHL team back. We talked about the food, which was genuinely excellent, because even when my stepmother tried to make me feel like a footnote, she had excellent taste in caterers. I ate my dinner. I watched my brother dance with his new wife. I watched my dad give a toast that was warm and funny and made the whole room laugh. I watched my stepmother's face during the toast and saw the moment she realized he hadn't mentioned her name as much as she'd anticipated, and I watched the smile hold anyway. I was going to leave quietly after dessert. That was the plan. Slip out, drive back to Ottawa, text my brother in the morning with congratulations, something genuine, something that would be just between us. Then my dad found me. He sat down in the empty seat beside me. Trevor had gone to find the bar, and for a moment he just sat there looking at the dance floor. "I'm sorry about the seating," he said. "It's fine." "It isn't." I looked at him. He looked older than I remembered, which is something that only ever hits me in person. My dad retired from the RCMP after 25 years. Staff sergeant. He'd spent his career being the kind of person who walked into difficult rooms and made things calmer just by being there. He was not that person at home. At home he was someone who loved his wife and his son and his daughter, and had never quite figured out how to manage all 3 of those things in the same room at the same time. "She means well," he started. "Dad." He stopped. We sat there. The string quartet was playing something that might have been Debussy. "I know," he said finally. He didn't say what he knew. He didn't need to. I went back to my table. I ate my dessert. And then, because the universe has a timing that none of us get to choose, everything changed. I heard the commotion before I saw it. That particular shift in ambient noise when something has gone wrong in a public space. Voices dropping, then rising. A chair scraping back. Someone calling out, high and frightened. I was already moving before I consciously decided to. Near the head table, a man was on the floor. He was one of my stepmother's brothers. I'd met him twice, a large, affable man who'd spent the cocktail hour talking about his fishing cabin near Kenora. He was conscious but ashen, one hand pressed to his chest, the other gripping the tablecloth. Two people were crouched beside him. One was trying to loosen his collar, the other was on the phone. I pushed through. "I'm a physician," I said, which is what we say in public because surgeon requires explanation. "Let me through, please." Someone moved. Someone else said, "Oh, thank God." I got down beside him, put two fingers to his carotid, took his other hand. "Sir, can you tell me where the pain is?" He looked at me. "Chest," he said. "Left arm." On a scale of 1 to 10. 7, 8. "How long?" 20 minutes maybe. I thought it was heartburn. "Has this happened before?" "Once, 2 years ago. They said it was a warning." Classic presentation. Anterior chest pain radiating to the left arm, diaphoresis, previous cardiac event. I looked up at the person with the phone. "Tell them possible STEMI male patient, approximately 60, conscious and alert. We need the defibrillator from the hotel emergency kit if they have one, and we need them here now." She repeated it into the phone, word for word. Good. Someone brought the defibrillator. It was a newer AED, which meant it would talk me through it if I needed it. I did not need it yet. His pulse was present and irregular, but present. I stayed with him. I talked to him. I told him my name, and I told him he was going to be fine, and I told him to keep looking at me and not at anything else. He asked me with the slightly dazed politeness of someone in significant pain, where I'd gone to school. I told him Sunnybrook. He said his sister had worked there. He asked which unit. I told him trauma. He said very quietly, "Well, good timing then." The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. I gave them the handoff vitals, timeline, presentation, my clinical impression, and one of them, a young woman who had the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, said, "You staying?" "I'll follow," I said. I stood up. My dress had a smudge on the knee from the floor. My heels were in my hand. I didn't remember taking them off. The ballroom had gone very quiet. My stepmother was standing 6 feet away from me. I don't know how long she'd been standing there. She was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Not the inventory look, not the dismissal. Something unguarded, something that looked almost like, I don't know, recognition maybe, the kind that comes too late and knows it. "He's stable," I said. "They're taking him to the Hotel Dieu. He'll need a cath lab tonight most likely. He should be fine." She didn't say anything. My dad was beside her. He put his hand on my shoulder. I picked up my clutch from the table, found my coat at the cloakroom and drove to the hospital. I stayed for 2 hours. My stepmother's brother, his name was Hugh, I learned from his wife, who arrived at the emergency room with her coat inside out, was taken to the cath lab. They found one significant blockage. They placed a stent. His cardiologist came out and told the family he was going to be fine, that the outcome would have been very different if there had been any delay in recognizing what was happening. Hugh's wife looked at me across the waiting room. She was still holding her coat inside out, in her lap. "That was you," she said. "In there, at the table." "Yes." "You knew right away?" It was a pretty clear presentation. She stood up and hugged me, which I hadn't anticipated, and I stood there with my arms at my sides for a second before I hugged her back. I drove back to the hotel at 1 in the morning. I sat in the parking garage for a while with the engine off. I thought about the place card near the kitchen. I thought about the wedding invitation with my name spelled wrong. I thought about my bedroom turned into a craft room while I was at school learning how to keep people alive. I thought about my dad's face when he said "I know." My phone lit up. It was my brother. "Are you okay? Where are you?" "Thank you. I don't just thank you." I texted back that I was fine, that I was glad Hugh was okay, that I text in the morning. Then my phone lit up again. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't open it. Then I did. This is Kathleen. I don't know if you have my number. We haven't spoken much. I know that's my fault. I wanted to say I'm sorry for tonight, for the seating. For a lot of things I think I'd been pretending weren't as serious as they were. Hugh could have if you hadn't been there. I can't think about it. I don't know how to start fixing things, but I wanted to start. I read it 3 times. I didn't answer that night. I wasn't ready to answer that night. I drove home the next morning. I stopped for coffee at a Tim Hortons outside of Hawkesbury because I always stop at that particular one on the drive back. It's a habit from residency. And I sat in the parking lot with a medium double-double and watched the Sunday morning traffic and thought about what it means to let someone start. It's not forgiveness exactly. I don't think I'm there yet. I don't think she's earned it yet, and I don't think you owe forgiveness to someone just because they've finally seen you clearly. I'm a doctor. I know the difference between a wound that's healing and a wound that just looks closed. The difference matters. But I thought about Hugh, who had 20 minutes of ignored chest pain at his nephew's wedding because he thought it was heartburn, and I thought about how quickly things can become irreversible, and I thought about my dad, who is getting older every time I see him in person, and I thought about the specific grief of arriving too late to something you can't undo. I answered Kathleen's message on Monday morning. I said, I got your message. I'm glad Hugh is okay. I'm not sure what fixing things looks like yet, but I think I'm willing to find out. I hit send and then I put my phone face down on my desk and went to see my first patient of the day, a 17-year-old boy who'd been in a car accident outside of Kanata, and he woke up while I was there and asked me, very earnestly, if his phone had survived. It hadn't. He took that worse than the collarbone, which made me laugh for the first time in about 4 days. I didn't tell him about the wedding. You don't tell your patients about your life. You just show up. You just keep showing up, even when you've been placed at the table near the kitchen, even when your name is spelled wrong on the envelope, even when the people who should know you best have been looking right through you for years. You show up anyway, because that's what you were trained to do. And eventually, not always, not automatically, but eventually, the right person is in the right place at the right moment, and something shifts. It's not a cure, but it's a start. I've thought a lot about the place card near the kitchen. Not the big moments, not Hugh on the floor, not Kathleen's text at 1 a.m, not the cardiologist coming out to tell the family everything was going to be fine. Those are the moments that feel like turning points when you're telling the story. But the thing I keep coming back to is that small rectangle of cardstock, my name slightly wrong, propped up against a water glass 6 feet from a service entrance. There's something clarifying about being underestimated for long enough. It strips away a lot of noise. You stop waiting to be acknowledged, and you start just doing the work, because the work is the only part that was ever actually yours. That's not a comfortable thing to learn. It costs something. But I think it's also where something like real integrity gets built, not from being recognized, but from continuing anyway when you aren't. I spent years being quietly competent in rooms where my stepmother had decided before I walked in that I didn't matter much, and I kept showing up. Not because I was hoping she'd change her mind, not because I was running some long game. I showed up because my dad was there, because my brother was there, because those relationships still meant something to me, even when the cost of maintaining them sometimes felt higher than I could afford. That's its own kind of moral reckoning, figuring out what you owe the people you love when those people don't always protect you the way they should. What I know now, and didn't fully understand then, is that the training mattered. Not just the medical training, though that's the part that happened to be visible on that particular Saturday night. I mean the longer training, the years of learning to read a room, to stay calm under pressure, to make a decision with incomplete information and live with it. That kind of thinking doesn't develop in comfortable circumstances. It develops in exactly the conditions I've been living in, where you're constantly required to be more capable than the space you've been given. Hugh didn't survive that night, because I'm exceptional. He survived because I was paying attention and because I'd put in enough work over enough years that paying attention had become automatic. That's just the truth of it. And Kathleen. I've turned her text over in my mind more times than I can count. I don't think she's a villain. I think she's someone who made a set of small, consistent choices over a long time. Choices that felt manageable in the moment, and then had to sit in a hospital waiting room at midnight and look at what those choices had added up to. That's its own hard thing to face. I'm not sure I would have done it faster than she did. I texted her back on Monday because I believe that people can change their minds about things. Not always, not easily, but the possibility exists, and I think you have to leave the door open to it, or you start to calcify in ways that aren't good for you either. I'm still a work in progress on that one. What I do know is this: the 3 things that carried me through: doing right by the people in that room even when they hadn't done right by me, thinking clearly when everything else was falling apart, and simply not quitting when quitting would have been so much easier. Those things were mine. Nobody gave them to me. Nobody could take them away. Not even someone who misspelled my name on a place card at her own son's wedding. That has to count for something. I think it does.